I'm Kevin Charoensri. I'm a fourth year undergrad in composition, bachelor's of music, and then I guess I'm a piano principal, but I'm a jazz pianist at the Butler School of Music as well.
Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you because you are one of the most accomplished undergraduate composition people I've heard about. So,
Thank you.
yeah, really excited to hear about your story and how you got here. So, composition is a you picture graduate students doing a lot of it, but you just hit the ground running. How did you get your start?
Yeah, so my start's pretty unconventional compared to a lot of composers, especially Texas composers. I started off in a very small band program. I wrote my first piece when I was 12 in seventh grade, and I played clarinet in sixth grade around 11 to 12. And I just remember we had a band of like 7 or 9 people, and then like our bass voice was the tenor saxophone. And I just remember my director saying, "Hey, like you play piano, why don't I teach you this notation program, Sibelius? And like, you have pretty good ears, we can work on it, but why don't you write some of these like film scores or like whatever, like just transcribe them into Sibelius so that our band can play them, because we can't play anything on JW Pepper or any of those big websites. We don't have the people." And so that's how I got my start writing for these super small, almost like chamber ensembles. And so my director threw me into the fire and he said, "Okay, if you write something, you better know how to rehearse it too." And he said, "You're conducting." And I was like, "What?" No. So he threw me up onto the podium in seventh grade. So you write a rehearsal plan and you communicate all of your thoughts. And so seventh grade, I got a dry run with kind of like the 7-person group. And then eighth grade, I believe, is when I wrote another piece and he threw me up to the top group. And so our top group was anywhere from advanced eighth graders to 18-year-old seniors. So me being 13 or 14 in eighth grade, I was conducting and giving comments to these 18-year-olds who were seniors. And of course, they weren't very happy. So, they started throwing stuff at me and whatnot. And so whenever I guest clinic now and the trumpets don't throw mutes at me, it's always a win. But yeah, that's how I got my start in composition in high school, writing for a small ensemble. And then as we got, as I started progressing, we started writing for more symphonic bands, like full wind ensemble, but we would still miss a few instruments, such as like bass clarinet or, some random things like that. And so those chamber kind of like those skills to get out of the pigeonhole were super, super helpful.
What was the hardest part about conducting at such a young age?
Ooh,
I've never heard of anyone conducting that young.
I think there's a lot of challenges when you're young. I mean, conducting in general, there's a lot of things to learn. I'm still learning it in my basic conducting classes. But in seventh grade, when you're at such an age difference, it's kind of one of the challenges was, how do I communicate as a 13-year-old to an 18-year-old senior? Like, there is not a lot of like crossover there. Those 5 years are like leaps and bounds apart. And so kind of, how do I give a comment to someone who's kind of above me? And how do I give a comment to someone who's my age? And where are the parallels there? And where do I kind of have to tread a little bit lighter? I think the hardest part about being a conductor at that age was actually the rehearsals by far. The performance was the easiest part, No one's going to throw stuff at you at a performance. I mean, not out of the question, but for the most part. But, in a rehearsal, like, how do you put it all together? How do you make everyone sound good while not stepping on each other's toes?
Yeah, and were there any like major problems that you ran into right away that you had to overcome?
I mean, I guess the age thing was the biggest thing. Also, like just me getting the pattern going. One skill that I still like to this day have not mastered, but I'm glad I got some practice in, was conducting with my right hand, but then playing the parts that we were missing, or, the parts that people needed help on, with my left hand on a piano. And so you're conducting like, let's say a 4 pattern, and then you're also like playing piano at the exact same time. And that's actually a skill that a lot of musical theater conductors need, which is a background I also had in high school. My junior and senior year, I conducted the musical, but we had such a small budget and it was COVID that, we did like a socially distanced musical, and I had to play piano while conducting an orchestra as well. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of those things are challenges.
Yeah, so then like talk me through, how did you decide to come here to Butler?
Yeah, so I'm from San Diego, California, originally on the West Coast. And so I wasn't too familiar with the University of Texas and that whole system. But my dad actually went to I guess what's known now as UT Dallas. And my mom went to A&M, or what's now known to be A&M. So we were familiar with Texas, but I wasn't personally. And so as I was doing all of these, like, kind of the high school track of band, playing clarinet, like honor bands and whatnot, I kept seeing the name Omar Thomas come up. And I was like, man, who is this guy? I didn't really figure it out. And then as I was researching schools, I listened to his piece. I remember listening to Come Sunday, and I had played some other pieces of his, but I listened to that and I was like, oh my goodness, like I need to know what this school is about. And so I did the interview, and after the interview, I knew this was the place. The interview was just like, most interviews are pretty intimidating, and I get it. I get why. But this one just felt so warm, welcoming. They wanted to get to know me as a person and not, oh, what can you sightseeing, or like, what's your music theory knowledge? And so from the interview, I knew that this was the place. And then I actually came here right when the vaccines were coming out, and I met with all the faculty, masked and stuff. But, they still met with me in person, and they were super welcoming. And actually our head of department, Kevin Charoensri, he walked me through like the entire campus, like 3 miles. And so after that, I was like, man, this guy just walked 3 miles with me. Like this, this is the place where I really felt welcome. So that's how I ended up here.
Well, and then what was it like, that transition from like Southern California to middle of Texas?
I'll say the heat is, the school is so great that it makes the heat worth it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
So, but what was it like when you transitioned into Butler? What were like, what classes did you take? What was your experience right off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, so when I got into Butler, I had a lot of goals. A few of them were like jazz piano, conducting, and of course, composition. And at the time, I'm probably most well known for wind ensemble, large ensemble at the moment. But at the time, I really had no idea. Like I could have done chamber, I could have done orchestra. I didn't really know. And so the faculty kind of helped me hone in what I wanted to do, which was mostly, I would call myself a jazz pianist, wind ensemble-ish composer at the moment. But yeah, they really helped me hone stuff in. And I still remember my first audition here for jazz piano. I couldn't read a single chord symbol. And they kicked me off after 4 measures. There were 80 people watching. This is the old way we did auditions. And I get why they kicked me off after 4 measures, but they had to get to everyone. But yeah, it was rough. And I worked really hard to take jazz piano my first year here. I didn't play any ensembles. I just took private lessons, practiced really hard. And then next year I made jazz ensemble our number 2 band here. But yeah, I mean, getting in here, I had to take the basic theory stuff, and a lot of basic courses, but it really gave me a chance to bond with like my class, like incoming class. And so although some of those classes where, you get up at 8 a.m., you're not really too happy about it, I really loved connecting with everyone here in my incoming class.
Yeah. So, and what was it like? Because in high school, you're only writing for, I don't even want to say wind ensemble,
Yeah.
like wind, small ensemble, I guess. Right. So, and what was it like all of a sudden now you're writing for jazz, you're writing for strings. What was that transition like?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'll do strings first. Strings was a whole new world to me that I had no idea about. We didn't have an orchestra in we didn't have an orchestra, like a school orchestra. We would hire other string players to come and play for our musicals, but other than that, I didn't really have any exposure to strings. And so when I got here, my first freshman semester, I wrote an orchestra piece with Professor Donald Grantham, and he's actually the author of The Technique of Orchestration. And so that was a great kind of like 101 on how to write for orchestra, because you have to be versatile as a composer. So that was a hard transition. And then with jazz, of course, my first year, I wasn't writing any jazz. I was just trying to figure out what a chord symbol was, And then, but as I got into my second year playing for the jazz ensemble here, and, they gave me the opportunity to write actually a lot of tunes for them. And so from there, wind ensemble and jazz kind of have this intersection. And Omar Thomas writes for both mediums, big band and wind ensemble. So it was great to study with him my second semester, freshman year, and my sophomore year in order to kind of just figure out like, okay, where are the intersections and then where do they differ?
Yeah, and what's it like writing for jazz? Because it's it's a lot of improv, right? So
Yeah.
you have to write, but you almost can't write too much.
Yeah, like just how you said it, you can't really write. You have to trust the players. In wind ensemble, there's a lot of like, okay, like you have to have the roadmap laid out. Just because there's regular symphonic bands about 40 people, regular big bands about roughly 16, 17 people. But there's also the idea of like, okay, all of these jazz musicians have been working on their improv, really their composition, really their voice for the last let's say it's their first year, like 18 or like however long they've been playing their instrument. and you really have to give them a chance to kind of show their voice. That's the beauty of jazz. And so, sometimes we would look at kind of like the let's call it the A of the big band tune, the first part where everyone's playing, and we'd look at the voicings and be like, you know what, that one didn't work, or you know what, okay, that one was good, okay, and I'd make revisions. And then the solo section, I would just say like, hey, how do you feel blowing on that? Like, how do you feel? Did my chord choices and harmonic choices and background choices allow you to fully express yourself? And so it's kind of like it's a different question than wind ensemble of like, okay, did I write everything to make sure that that everyone was able to stay on together, but also did everyone feel like they were able to express themselves through the music? So it's the same question, just two different ways to answer it, I think.
Yeah, and so far it's like it sounds like you've had like an amazing experience, but what you've been able to accomplish in these last 4 years is really incredible. Culminating with you wrote a piece that's going to be performed in May, right?
Yep.
With the Presidential Marine Band.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's a feat that like any composer would dream of. 40 years into their career, and here you're doing it in your undergrad. Talk me through that. How did that come about?
How that came about, the assistant director and we met at Midwest about 2 years ago. And at the time, I didn't put the face to the name. And so,
and for those people listening, Midwest is like Mecca especially for band, for all, for orchestra too, but for band, it's big. It's in Chicago. Yeah. It's at the end of or middle of December, right? Yeah. And everyone goes there, right? So, yeah.
So yeah, we met at this giant conference, and I was probably like, it was like hour 18 of no sleep. So I didn't really put the two together. It was like, oh, I'm just a percussionist. And I was like, okay. So I just kind of talked to this guy as a friend, and we went to this kind of like group dinner together, sat next to each other. And I was just joking around with this guy, not really, talking about much, and told him a little bit about what I did and whatever. And then the next morning I was like, wait a sec, Darren Lynn, that's the assistant director of the President's Own. And I look up his Facebook and I'm like, oh my goodness. I had no idea. And so 2 years pass, and then I get a Facebook message that's like, oh, hey, we're doing your piece, by the way. Would you want to come out for it? Or, what are you thinking? And so I was just like, whoa, that came to such a surprise for me. So yeah.
Yeah, and so a student here who, because a lot of times undergrads will be kind of really siloed into their classes they're taking in the practice room. What is that like, leaving the school and going to a conference like this for someone who's never been to it?
Yeah, conferences are intimidating. They're a lot, and I think like the whole thing about conferences in music is that they're not really business conferences. Like, yes, there's a business side to it. You got to know how to market, you got to know how to publish and whatnot. But ultimately, it's a people convention, And I think one of the greatest things about the Butler School of Music, and this is not biased whatsoever, I would say this on any podcast, is that it's such a warm, welcoming environment. I can talk to ed majors, I can talk to instrumentalists, I can talk to string players, choir, it doesn't matter. And all of these connections, they really help you, one, like with the industry, knowing people when you get out of undergrad or out of school, but two, it just helps your people skills. And so at Midwest, I found that the people who just kind of go in are like, here's my business card, please play my music, here's a transaction, like you play my music, I, shout you out on this platform, and the connections like that aren't genuine. And I find that the best people that I've connected with at Midwest are we're just going dinner together randomly, and we're just joking around talking about burgers or, who knows what, right? So yeah, I think getting out of the building, not in a negative sense, but kind of getting out of the building is kind of a must-have for composers, and really a lot of people, to be able to connect with people. And I feel like the skills you build in the building with connecting with other people really allow you to succeed outside.
Great. And it's a great story, but you had to have missed some things, because you can't just write and then they just pick up your piece. Was there anything in there that else? Yeah.
So when Rising Light, my piece that kind of took off, was premiered here fall of 2022. So that was my sophomore year, by Ryan Kelly and the Wind Symphony. Professor Jerry Junkin, allowed the piece to be posted on U Texas Bands, which is our band YouTube account. and it did quite well on YouTube. And soon enough, I started seeing like stuff in my inbox of like, hey, this school's doing it. How would you feel about, potentially coming out and working with our ensembles? And this is something where I was really surprised, like, oh, man, I'm like 19, I'm like a sophomore. Like, what am I going to tell you guys? But a big part of Rising Light was it introduced like Asian musical language. I'm Thai. So I took some Thai lullabies that my mom sang to me, and I put them into this wind ensemble medium, influenced with a little bit of jazz writing as well. And so I think that, we were talking about this in composition forum the other day. My teacher, Omar Thomas, said, all music, no matter what level, is somehow educational. Even though I can't tell, an oboe player, I never played oboe, how to play this note. I can show them this new melody that maybe they've never played before in the wind ensemble medium, and that's educational. So I felt like, I've had quite a few schools reach out to me over my undergrad to come out, guest lecture, or work with their ensembles. And the biggest thing is I just try to educate in the sense of like show new music, show these new musical influences, not really tell them how to play their instrument. They know how to do that. They know how to do it better than me, but show them music that maybe they've never heard before. And it's even better sometimes when, I meet other fellow Asian Americans on these residencies and teaching opportunities where they tell me that like, wow, I played a lot of music and they're really good at their instrument, but I've never played anything that has represented my culture this well. And I think that's really where like the magic kind of happens on these residencies. You're not there to get a good recording, or almost in a sense, you're not even there for a good performance. It's always a great bonus if that happens, but you're really there to teach them and kind of educate each other on different musical styles, I think.
Yeah. So what are some of these schools that you've gone out to?
Yeah, let's see. My first one was Texas A&M Commerce, and then from there, that was my second semester of sophomore year, spring of 2023, and then Texas Tech that same semester. The next semester was Texas Tech, University of Delaware. Next semester was UCLA, and then the Pacific Symphony Youth Wind Ensemble. Cal State Fullerton had me back out this last 3 weeks ago. And then I'm actually going to guest conduct. Actually, I have the score here. I'm going to guest conduct my piece, Jasmine Tree, with Pacific Symphony Youth Concert Band. So, yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, it's almost like a little bit of full circle because, when you're like in seventh grade, you're teaching high school. And now you're undergrad, you're teaching college. What's the similar or difference about those two experiences?
Man, I think there's a good similarity of when I was in seventh grade, I could have fell into the pitfall of being like, a cocky seventh grader and being like, you know what, like, you guys don't have the opportunity to get up here. Like, you should be playing my music correct. And that's a terrible path. And my band director always said, like, you ever find yourself even close to saying that, just shut up and back off. And so I think that like the respect of like, okay, look, you're older than me, but let's see what we can learn from each other. Right. I remember my first residency, I was 19, and they said, you're going to give an undergrad symposium. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And then you're going to give a grad symposium. And I was like, dude, I'm 19. And like, there's like 4 30-year-olds in the room. Like, what the heck am I going to tell them? And so I remember it was like a conference room like this, Texas A&M Commerce, 6 people are just staring at me, and they're all 10 years older than me. And I was like, guys, I don't really know what to say, man. But then I was like, I started telling them, like, here's what I can tell you guys. This is how I grew up. This is the music of my culture. So I showed them a little bit of Thai music. And I said, if you look at these measures here, this is where I like kind of inserted it. And like, this is how I thought that this was the best idea to communicate this Asian musical phrase within the Western medium. And they were like, wow, like I actually learned something. And I was like, what? Are you serious? And then I asked them some questions. I was like, so, what's after undergrad, guys? And so it was this wonderful opportunity where I got to learn career stuff, and hopefully, they learned something from me as well. So I think there's a lot of similarities there, and I'm so glad that I had those opportunities in 7th grade because they kind of set me up to be, to just absorb every opportunity I get here when I'm at this age now.
Yeah. Well, let me repeat one of those graduate students. What after undergrad? Because you graduate in like 6 months.
Yeah. So I realized here that with the opportunities to guest lecture and work with ensembles and just helping some of the younger composers here, I realized I have a real passion for teaching. And some of my best excitement is not necessarily when I write something good. I get excited, but when I can help someone write something good or help someone, figure this lick out on piano, that's when I really get excited. And so I definitely want to teach at the university level, I think. And so I'm going to go through with a master's and doctorate. And for master's right now, I don't know where, but the current list is Michigan State University, USC, Juilliard, Yale. So those are kind of the main 4 or 5.
And would it be for composition?
It would be for composition, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sitting down.
Yeah,
I really appreciate this, and I can't wait to see what you're doing in 5 years or 10 years. So it's just incredible.
Thank you so much for having me.